research purposes by students, schools are facing pressure to react to the risks of plagiarism.
The surveys that were done back in sort of 2001 by Don McCabe in the US indicate that there was quite a high level of plagiarism both in schools and universities. Institutions are very concerned about it. Institutions believe they've got a very big problem. And at the beginning of this year, the ATL, the Association of Teachers and Lecturers, did a survey of 306 form teachers, and that survey said that 58% of them believed that plagiarism was a big issue.
In response to this increasing concern within schools about plagiarism, free workshops have been held across the country.
The first session of the day, as I said, we're looking at what is plagiarism, because you can't really have any discussions about plagiarism issues, think about any solutions before you've actually got a clear idea about what it is you're talking about. The workshops came about from previous work that I've been doing, looking at plagiarism issues within higher and further education, and we decided to see if there are similar sorts of issues within schools as compared to higher and further education. But we did have trouble actually getting to school teachers through issues of releasing them their staff time, and also the recognition that plagiarism is actually an important issue. But we did get a lot of librarians attending. So this particular programme has been targeted at school librarians with a view to them taking the issues back to their schools.
It's almost sometimes as if the idea of copying things from the net is endorsed by the work that's given out by the teachers themselves. There's instances all the time of people's good coursework and good essays actually being photocopied and given out by staff without the students' permission.
The first thing that any institution needs to do is ensure that students have the correct skills and that they're properly informed about the expectations of them when they're doing assignments, of course. Especially if the process that they're used to for creating a piece of work is going to the web and just pulling it together. And I think this is why it's so important to deal with this in secondary education, especially now where there's potentially quite a big gap between the sort of culture that the students are used to and working with online and their tutors.
In your pack there is a sheet of paper called Plagiarism, Where Do You Draw the Line? So we're going to let you decide whether you think it is or isn't plagiarism. There is no off-the-shelf solution to the plagiarism issue, unfortunately, as much as people would like one. I think the answer does lie in education, and education right from primary schools, and a coherent approach across the schools and education sector in general. So they're not just presented at GCSE or A-level with a new way of working, you know, the idea of referencing sources and that it's not okay just to copy and paste, that they need to put some thought into issues themselves is habit and not just something they feel they have to do for exams. It's not easy, and it will take a number of years to get these practices embedded.
We decided it was plagiarism because it was telling them to learn it off by heart.
We decided it wasn't because it depended what the student actually physically wrote down. They might have remembered it off by heart, but it depends what they actually physically wrote down at the end of the day.
I'm more confused now than I was to start off with.
While schools may just be starting to become aware of plagiarism, universities have been dealing with the issue for many years.
One thing that we found is that students are coming to the university without any prior knowledge of plagiarism or referencing. So, for instance, in our first lecture, we asked of the 160 students there how many of them had heard of referencing, Harvard referencing, and of that group, 3 people put their hand up. So if those 3 people are the only people in the room who know about plagiarism and referencing, then we know that there's another 157 who don't. And that's why I think it's essential that we give them the tools to realise what is plagiarism, teach them how to reference correctly, because if they do it and they do it seriously, then potentially they could be thrown out of university.
Until we came here, I'd never done anything on plagiarism. The coursework at school, you didn't have to bother about it. Most of my GCSE coursework was probably plagiarising because we didn't have to reference and we were never taught about that or that it was important.
I think definitely at least on A levels they should cover this subject because it is majorly important. You can be kicked out from uni from anywhere because of that.
And I think it's hard coming to uni and having to learn a completely different way of writing an essay when you've got so used to doing it another way. If you'd just always done it that way, it'd already kind of be in there.
At the University of Leeds, a study skills workshop has been introduced for some first-year students, specifically to tackle their lack of awareness about plagiarism.
Okay, so today what we're going to look at is the skills needed in writing a bibliography. That's referencing within the text and also including the bibliography at the end of the essay. The aim of this is to give you the skills needed to produce good work and also to avoid the problems of plagiarism. Has anybody here done any skills work at school, which has given you the background for, avoiding plagiarism and doing bibliographies? A couple of you, right. So for the rest of you, it's to fill these gaps so that you have these skills throughout your university career.
The reason why I was asked to develop the module was because we were trying to bridge a gap really between historically students were coming to university with some study skills that now they don't necessarily have. And we found in the first year we ran it, I think approximately 80 students out of 130 took it as an optional module. And we could see when they were being marked straight away which ones had taken that module. I think for us it was quite a clear decision to say all of our students need to do this in their first year.
Writing is now actually more important than it was before. Just about everything online involves written text. And many students are much more IT literate than their tutors are. And they'll already be contributing to websites. They're already writing. And also, they're probably already taking content from all over the place and building it into their own websites, happily oblivious to the fact that somebody else may own the copyright. So I think it's actually very important to start this work as early as possible. I would think that children of the ages 8, 9 could start to cope with some of these concepts about the fact that the content is owned by somebody and you should really acknowledge where it's come from, and it's not just a free-for-all.
At Hemsworth Arts and Community College near Pontefract, lessons on plagiarism have been delivered in one department for the past few years.
If we quoted anything, if we'd used a source of information, we need to reference it, okay? And what's another good reason for having good references? What does that show that you've done? You've done loads of research, so you should get credit for all that research that you've done. As a college, we've been involved in vocational education for a long time, which has a significant coursework element. And as the years have gone on and students have moved more from using text and much more to using internet, then we have had to recognise and develop strategies and policies that help us to help the students to work in the context of the requirements of the awarding bodies. I know that from my own experience with my daughter at university, the first thing that she had to learn when she got to university was how to Harvard reference. And it was quite a steep learning curve for her. And it did occur to me that perhaps that was a system that we could bring in on a book. A book's published in 2005. It's quite easy to find the date. Does that book change? No, because once that book's published, there it is. Somebody can always go and get it, can't they? Yeah? What about a website?
It changes.
It changes, right? So, what do you think you might have to say in your bibliography? Because you know that websites change.
What day you took it off that website?
Excellent. That's exactly right. You need to say exactly when you took that information from the website. What we need our students to be able to do is to avoid any suggestion that they have plagiarised other people's work. And one of the ways that we can do that is to teach them to recognise that they have used the work of others. And it is important that we actually teach them this skill. Many of them haven't done coursework before, and it's the first opportunity they've really had to do extensive research. And as a consequence, they do actually need to be taught how to reference and give credit to the work of others. Summarise the final paragraph. So you see this here. It goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines.
So do I have to copy that out?
No, if you copied it, that wouldn't be summarising it, would it? If you summarise something, what do you do?
I don't know, make it shorter.
That's right, exactly right. You make it shorter.
If somebody would have said to us before we'd had this lesson that we were doing plagiarism in our coursework, then we just wouldn't have had a clue what they were on about. But now, if somebody come up to us and said, you've got plagiarism in this piece of work, we'd know what to do about it and we'd know how to change it.
If I didn't know about it, then I'd be doing it without noticing it, and then that's when I'd lose marks and stuff on my exams for doing it.
We've got to do a lot of research and we are copying a lot of things from other people's work. So it's useful to know that if we do that, we've got to put where we got it from, because I wasn't doing that in the first place.
In terms of plagiarism, we're just sort of dipping our toe in the water, really. We have got the Vocational Studies Department that have actually done an awful lot on this, but we're at the stage now where we're starting to roll that out to other areas. So, for example, the Maths Department, Science Department are involved with Judith and her team. And, you know, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If Judith's got a good system, then, you know, other people can learn from that.
OK, Andrea, so what I was thinking was today might be a good idea if we just caught up with each other about where we both are in terms of dealing with plagiarism.
Well, what we've done is we've developed a booklet like you have in your faculty and in science, and we've actually developed that specifically for the scientists.
I think you've got to look at each department's sort of workload and look at where their priorities are and talk to them about whether or not this is an issue for them. And, you know, some people it may be just raising awareness of it altogether, but for some people they may have already started and not be aware that Judith's doing lots of things, and it could save them an awful lot of time and effort by just simply having maybe a 15-20 minute conversation with Judith or somebody in that team.
So one of the things that we found with students is they're very good at bibliography, but one of the things that it's quite hard for them to get a grasp of is how to actually cite in the text. So I've just started doing some little citing exercises so they get the idea of putting a name, and they can now do et al. And the date. So I don't know whether you might want to sort of look at doing something like that
I
as
will.
well.
I'd be interested in coming and having a look at what you're actually doing with them and then actually doing that within science.
The students are more confident when they go to university because they've had the opportunity to develop good practice, to organise, to evaluate their work and to reference it. We know that it's not up to the standard of a university when they leave, but we do know that they're ahead of the game. You've actually taken the key areas that you're looking at for your essay and you've put each of the websites under the topic. So why did you do that?
Because it's easier for me to go back through my work, and also I've put it like that in my work. I can always go back and find the research that I need.
Oh, good.
I think the issue for us is teaching students how to use the ICT appropriately. When we first started talking about using mobile phones and podcasting and iPods and things like that, some staff were a little bit reticent, but you know we've had to work with those staff and say, look, this is getting to the 21st century really, and this is what students want, and this is how they'll learn best, and it's how we actually manage that situation, which is the challenge. But we've got to take that on. We can't sort of bury our heads in the sand and say no, we're still using the old-fashioned book system.